Greetings, growers from around the world. Jordan River here, back at you with more GrowCast Full Spectrum Daily. Today we have Dr. Coco back on the line. You know, we talk about lights, we talk about spectrum, we talk about the new Viper spectras and lenses and so much more, including autoflower growing and growing big plants. It's a really good episode, super informative. I know you're going to love this exploration with Dr. Coco. But before that, shout out to AC Infinity, baby. ACinfinity.com. Code GrowCast15 to get your savings and keep the lights on here at GrowCast. We appreciate your support and we love AC Infinity. They make the best grow tents around, extra thick poles. They've got nice, durable, thick siding. Now they have the new side ports. People have been asking for those, and AC Infinity, listen. Plus, they've got everything else you need to grow. They've got lights and pots and fans and their oscillating fans, the Cloud Ray system. Check out their humidifiers, the Cloud Forge. How nice is your humidifier? Maybe it's time to replace that. The Cloud Rays are my favorite oscillators on the market. And of course, their Cloud Line series, what they got it all started with all those years ago when we were partners with AC Infinity. All they made were those inline fans, and they're the best in the game. So shout out to the entire AC Infinity suite. They've got everything you need to get growing, from fans to tents to lights. Code GrowCast15 works at ACinfinity.com. You support us and you're getting some badass durable grow gear while you're doing it. So thank you to all you listeners using code GrowCast15, and thank you to AC Infinity. All right, everyone, let's get into it with the great Dr. Coco. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to GrowCast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. Before we get started, as always, I urge you, please turn someone on to GrowCast. Turn someone on to growing. It's the best thing you can do. And see everything that we're up to at growcastpodcast.com/action. There you'll see all the action, the seeds, the membership, the classes, everything is up there. Today, we have a classic friend of GrowCast back on the show. You know him, you love him. We're going to knock out some listener questions today. Dr. Coco is back on the line. What's up, Dr. Coco? How you been?
Hey, Jordan. I've been doing really great. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. I always look forward to doing GrowCast.
Hell yeah, man. We got a list of listener questions right here that are going to be really dope to knock out. I know you got a lot of thoughts on these, but really quickly, what's been going on? How's Coco for Cannabis? How's the Patreon going? Autoflowers and all that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so I started a new Patreon. I'm doing the Ask Dr. Coco show every week through my Patreon. It kind of spun out of the consulting work that I do for commercial growers and wanting to kind of be able to spend time one-on-one with home growers in the same way, but kind of make it make sense for everybody involved and at a budget that kind of would work for people. So decided to do it through Patreon on the show. I'm really having fun with it. I have like a guest come on every week and, do like a little consultation with them on the show for the audience. They get to ask all their kind of questions. People send in questions in advance and you can ask questions during the show. Do it on a Zoom webinar. So I know you're used to that platform, and yeah, it's just fun. So I've been really enjoying doing that. We've been doing it for about a couple of months. So,
yes, man, I heard you had some interesting autoflower talk come up with a commercial grower, right?
Yeah. Actually had him on as one of the guests on the show a while ago, but yeah, so I'm working with a new commercial client now who's growing autoflowers and setting up just two big rooms to do autoflowers sort of on an offset. Really interesting. We thought about, sort of the standard reasons why most growers grow clones, the trade-offs and the pros and cons. And in his situation, we decided to go for autoflowers. A lot of interesting things that are different about planting a large-scale grow like that with autoflowers than there are when you're planting a large-scale grow like that with clones. And it's just been really interesting to think through a lot of those kind of differences, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can you talk about those? Are you using feminized autoflowers for these?
We are using feminized autoflowers from some fairly big and reputable breeders. So one of the issues there is, seedling stage is kind of inconsistent. I mean, it's hard to get, we're growing 80 plants per room for the first run through. So getting 80 plants to be pretty well coordinated. I mean, how many seeds do you have to start in order to be sure that you've got sort of 80 good plants ready to move into flower?
Right.
Keeping them all coordinated. With autoflowers, it's a little bit tougher than with photos, because the photo periods, you're just coordinating the flowering period. You're doing it by flipping the lights, and you're doing it when the plants are already sort of, healthy, vigorous, mature, responsive plants. Timing autos from seed is, it's a little bit more challenging, basically, figuring out plants that are going to grow well together. And just to give everybody a little bit of an insight why that's so important is because dry space is limited. So we have one dry room. You can't be kind of harvesting 80 different plants as they come ripe. You've got to harvest them all on one day and load your dry room. You can't be sort of loading your dry room over the course of a week, because that'll really screw up the drying of the earliest plants that you put in there.
You need that consistency that farmers want. And this points to what you've talked about on the show before, which is like, true uniformity in breeding and doing these inbred lines and these outcrosses. Before we get into the listener questions, do you think that that's where everything is headed? I mean, here you are doing your first commercial feminized autoflower grow.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but is that not the future? Do you think planting feminized autoflower seeds that all come out the same? You know what I mean?
One of the things that I'm talking to the client about is he keeps complaining about the lack of consistency. And I'm like, the breeders are still focused on, maximizing terpenes, maximizing cannabinoids. They're still focused on these other issues. They haven't sort of focused on consistency issues. Plants grown from seed. And, the market hasn't demanded it, because the growers that are really sensitive to consistency have been growing clones.
Yep.
And the growers that are sort of growing seeds generally are at small enough scale that they don't need to be as concerned about, coordination of all of the different plants.
Right. And even they enjoy that little surprise, that little hunt. So there's actually a benefit in that. But I think that is going to shift. The more and more commercial spaces that come online, the further we get these strains dialed in, like you're saying, especially on the autoflower side, I think the attention will turn towards uniformity.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that we decided to run this grow with autoflowers is because we wouldn't have to have a separate space where we kept moms all of the time. We could turn that sort of space with only running 2 big flower rooms much more efficiently with growing plants from seed every time. So it's interesting that thinking through the different kinds of pros and cons. We got to be able to nail down some of these consistency issues, or figure that the other sort of strategy we've taken is, we may be able to load the room with plants that are going to be at least 2 weeks later. Like if we have any issues and we can't fully load the room, then, we could start plants that are at least 2 weeks behind, because by that point, the dry room will be empty. But nobody wants to run a room like that. You want to have, your whole room be sort of maximally full the whole time. And it's just presenting interesting challenges. But to get back to your original question, yes, I think this is showing sort of how significant the need is for consistency in cannabis seeds if we expect larger scale growers to grow from seeds. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the interesting sort of idiosyncrasies of the cannabis market, I think.
I agree. And I think it's coming. I think the change is coming, man.
Yeah. We're moving in that direction. That they represent, and I'll be able to say more as this grow starts having harvests, right? But we're anticipating larger yields than we would be able to receive off of photo period plants in the same timeline.
Right.
And we would have to keep a separate space for moms. So if those sort of sides of our calculations bear fruit, right?
If your calculations are correct, yes.
Yeah. And as I said, I'll be able to say more about this, but there are other advantages in terms of, maximizing your capital utilization, like keeping your lights running for a longer period of the day,
right,
as opposed to having them off for 12 hours
all
every
those
day.
Nuances, the space and all of that. It's going to be interesting to see the data that you have at the end of this. So really cool.
And then think about how that works in different areas. Where this client is, he has very cheap electricity. So running the lights longer doesn't represent a huge sort of additional cost, where if we were able to get any kind of additional harvest out of that, it would probably be worth it. Some other growers may be in a different situation with their costs.
Paying
so that's
more
where,
per watt. Yeah, that's a really good point. That segues nicely into the first question that we have here from listeners. That segues really nice. Do you want to get into some light talk?
Yeah, let's get into some light talk. You're asking me a question about a light I'm reviewing right now, but I think the other question is about like spectrum, right?
Okay, yeah. Let's start with spectrum, and then I got to hear about this Viper Spectra light and all these new phrases that come out, man. But let's start from the top here. I did have a listener just write in and ask, can you have Dr. Coco give a quick overview of like different parts of the light spectrum and what they mean? Like we hear these kind of general overviews like, oh, red light for flowering, blue spectrum for veg, green doesn't affect the plants. Like these are all just kind of, I know a lot of these are myths as well.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of how we get presented this information. So could you talk about light spectrum, blue versus red versus green, and why we use full spectrum light?
Absolutely. So, in a general sense, for photosynthesis, plants can harness, and we used to think it was just really the range from 400 to 700 nanometers. It goes a little bit higher and really a little bit lower as it sort of tapers off than that. But that 400 to, say, 750 nanometers runs pretty much the same as the visible spectrum. So the shorter, the 400 nanometer wavelength light is blue. And the longer 750 nanometer wavelength light is like red and far red infrared. And basically it's the rainbow in the middle, right? The rainbow actually is a prism that sort of reveals that spectrum where you go from really violet and blue, and there's greens and yellows in the 500 to 600 nanometers, and then reds basically above 600. Plants use all of that light for photosynthesis, and we want to give them a mix because we want to be activating both photosystems. So we don't want to just give them one wavelength of light. That's not efficient. And that's why the original sort of LED lights would use red diodes and blue diodes and create this blurple light because they were basically trying to use the most efficient diodes at the time. The 450 nanometer blue diodes are very efficient, and the 660 nanometer red diodes are very efficient. So they would combine those two sets of diodes. They'd be triggering both photosystems. There wouldn't be any green light in those lamps. Plants grew pretty well under them despite that because, photosynthesis was being sort of fully triggered. One of the biggest drawbacks of the blurple lights for horticulture was that they made visual identification of plant issues very difficult.
It's so true. It's hard to see what the fuck is going on under that blurple light.
100%. I mean, and you've been around this game long enough to remember when everybody was growing with blurple lights, somebody would send you a picture of their plants and you'd be like, okay, can you turn off the grow light and put a regular light on the plant? Because I can't see shit, right? Like, it's just like, it looks like dark almost because like,
it looks like it's in a nightclub. It looks like you sent me a shot from the club in the plant.
Exactly. So that's one of the issues. That's one of the benefits. And part of this question is sort of like, why do we use the full spectrum light? One of the reasons, and really one of the main reasons, is because it allows us to see the plants better and to be sort of better gardeners in that regard, because a lot of plant-based issues with nutrition and with pests, you observe them because of the coloration of the leaves, which is very difficult to observe under blurple light. So that's part of it. Now, beyond sort of just powering photosynthesis, different wavelengths of light have different effects on how the plant is going to grow during vegetative growth. So when the plant is, adding cells, basically, and growing vegetatively. With cannabis plants, this is, the first month or so with autos and until you flip to 12-12 with photoperiod plants. During that vegetative growth, if the plant is exposed to primarily blue light, then it will grow much sort of shorter cells, much stockier cells, basically. If it's exposed to a lot of red light, then it will grow longer cells, elongated cells.
Right.
Okay. assuming the same number of cells are added to the plant, then under red light, the plant is going to grow much, quote unquote, stretchier than it would under blue light.
Okay, that's something I've heard. So that's a real phenomenon with plants in general.
Yes, that's a real phenomenon. And that's why we used to veg under metal halide.
Right.
Because HPS lights have too much red. And if you veg under HPS lights, you get these plants that are sort of tall and lanky. And growers preferred to have, tighter node spacing. If you want tighter node spacing and sort of a stronger plant, then you want these compact cells. You don't want these elongated cells. So we would want to have a higher density or a more richer mix of blue and a lesser mix of red.
Wow.
So growers would grow under the metal halide to avoid having too much red, basically.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. I didn't know it literally affected the cell structure. That is really cool. And of course, that's what would make it stretchier. But just to have that picture in my mind is pretty cool.
And that's why it leads to, sort of a weaker kind of growth too, because it's not like growing stretchier because it's growing more. It's just, the cells are basically longer than they would be otherwise.
Lanky cells.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And that's why those HPS buds come out a little bit different than when people switch over to LED. They just say, hey, my bud shape is a little bit different. Is it similar because of the cell?
So bud shape, Bugbee's been looking into this. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised at the degree of sort of certainty he comes down on some of these answers, because I still understand how there could be some mechanisms, but in the test that Bugbee's run, changing spectrum during flowering has no impact on the plant.
Oh,
it's not doing the same sort of vegetative growth anymore. And cannabis growers know this because at the end of the bolt or the flowering stretch, the plant essentially stops growing vegetatively and just kind of packs on flowers, right? Just grows those flower structures. That does not appear to be influenced by the spectrum of light. And I know growers have a hard time sort of rationalizing that. And they think like there's some magical spectrum to add during flowering. And I've been hit a lot of times with growers saying like, no, you need more red during flowering. And that's why growers used to use HPS during flowering while they use metal halide during veg. And my answer to that is HPS is better than metal halide. HPS is more efficient.
Right.
So if you have a 1,000-watt setup, you're going to get a lot more light out of an HPS bulb than you're going to get out of metal halide bulb. So you would want to use the HPS bulb because you're getting more photons. You're going to grow more cannabis, but it's not because they're more red. They just happen to be more red. The reason you couldn't grow with those HPS bulbs in veg was because the plants would grow too lanky. And by the time they get to flowering, the red isn't going to affect them anymore. So it's just more light, and adding more light allows us to grow, more cannabis.
That makes a lot of sense. And that probably lends to, correct me if I'm wrong, where that theory of the green light comes from, right? Because aside from what these spectrums do to your plants, it depends on how efficient they are at delivering the photons. And isn't green one of the less efficient ones? Is that where that myth of green light doesn't affect plants came from, you think?
Yeah, exactly. If you look at the McCree curve, which is sort of the photosynthetic, and it's not perfect. I mean, McCree did that research back in the 70s. And there's been some people that have sort of updated that, and Bugbee's teams and other researchers that they're affiliated with are trying to extend that range. But that McCree curve is basically plotting the plant's responsiveness to different wavelengths of light, right? And anybody can just Google this if you want to see what the McCree curve looks like. But it rises quickly from 400. It has an initial peak around 450 nanometers. There's a trough through the 500 to 600 range, and then another peak that's even a higher peak at red. Okay, that like 650 to 700 nanometers, really tall peak. And so that's sort of the how the plants respond. The difference between the two peaks and the trough is not much. Like, if the tallest peak is 100% efficiency, the trough in the green and yellow is at like 85% efficiency.
Interesting. So less of a chasm than I thought, but the green and the yellow lives in that trough.
The green and the yellow lives in that trough. The grow light manufacturers, I really believe the green light thing, there's two factors that lead to this. One is there's the easily observable fact that plants appear to us to be green. And that leads growers to make the easy deduction that the green light is bouncing off of the plant. It's not being used by the plant. And all the other wavelengths of light are being used by the plant. So green light shouldn't affect the plant because it's not being absorbed. And that's just really,
not true. Yeah.
It's based on kind of a grain of truth that you just build off of in a way that you can't, basically. The plants are reflecting some green light, but they're also using it. The green light actually penetrates deeper into the cells and into the leaves than the blue light does.
Right. I've heard that as well. So thus this full spectrum. It's not just about this peak of...
That's also true. That's also true. Full spectrum light, the actual measured plant responsiveness to it is not significant compared between blurple light and full spectrum light. But you're right. It is a sort of more well-rounded photosynthesis. And all the light is basically interacting with the plants a little bit differently. The other thing about the green light is that, the early generation LEDs only use red and blue light. And I think that also encouraged a lot of growers to think that plants didn't use green light.
Because otherwise they would have added it.
The dirty secret there is blue diodes and red diodes were the most efficient diodes. They also sort of mapped onto the McCree curve. But LED manufacturers tried to sell it as being, the best spectrum for plants and being the most efficacious spectrum for plants. And that's why they were doing blurple. And this was the light that plants actually used for photosynthesis. There was a lot of marketing around that and sort of misapplying the McCree curve or exaggerating those peaks in the McCree curve. And I think that the real reason they were using the red and blue diodes, it works and they were really efficient, but they that marketing push, I think, led a lot of growers to think that the green light doesn't matter.
That is super, super fascinating. And I am also surprised that Bug Bee comes down so hard on that argument, because it's a phenomenon that I've observed in other people's gardens where they switch from HID to LED and their flower shape comes out a little bit different. Now, it could be any number of things, right? The temperature changes, the leaf.
Yeah, so flower shape isn't one of the things Bugsby's specifically looking at. Bugby's looking at harvest yield and cannabinoid contents. It has found no significant differences in yield or cannabinoids based on altering the spectrum during the flowering period. Now, some of that research entails using, actual HPS bulbs. A lot of it, they're just altering the wavelengths of light that they're being exposed to. All of it's using LEDs, right? So they're able to dial in very specific spectrums that they want to test using LEDs. So I guess there's some grain of salt there. But it is interesting that, in those tests where they alter, so they changed like the proportion of blue from 20% to 50% of the light mix, no effect on yield or cannabinoids.
That doesn't super surprise me with all the good flower I've seen grown under all types of different lights. I guess it doesn't super surprise me.
Yeah. So I guess my message about this to growers is you can play with spectrum during veg to alter the way your plants grow. And if you give them more blue light, they'll stay shorter. If you give them more red light, they'll grow taller. You don't necessarily want to use red light to grow tall plants, though, but you can play with it like that. By the time you get to the flowering period, it really doesn't matter. We're just trying to give plants all the light they can handle so that, they can maximize their production during that limited period of time that we can give them light during the flowering period. So at that point, quantity of light matters much more than spectrum. And frankly, that's why growers used to switch to HPS, because they could get more quantity from the same hardware, not because the spectrum was sort of better suited or led to better results.
Man, that is really cool. That's a great way to think about it and a great overview, which is like there's the photon saturation that we're concerned about,
Right.
And there's the spectrum's effect on the way plants vegetate that we're also thinking about, but also how efficient they are each at delivering those photons. All of those things separate in your head, very important to understand. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people get like hung up on very specific parts of their grow when they may be better served focusing on the fucking fundamentals, man. You know, instead of like really concerning yourself with spectrum and VPD and things like that. I mean, I speak to gardeners who have been gardening for decades and they're like, I'm still teaching people how to water, you know, and they're 5 years in. Like, get your watering game on point, get your nutrition on point, your plant training on point. And then once you're, you know, really, really capable in those things, I feel like this is like the icing on the cake, getting into things like that. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a good way to think about it. A good way to think about light in general for your grow. You know, one final thought, I guess, about sort of these different types of diodes would be red light is still the most efficient light to create in LEDs by far, where we create a lot more photons for the same amount of power with the 660 nanometer diodes and with the 730 nanometer diodes than we do with any other diodes. And so it's a reason that grow light manufacturers always add a bunch of 660 nanometers and sometimes add the 730 nanometer diodes, because you can get sort of more light per watt from them. One of the drawbacks there that manufacturers think about is we can't add too many because that'll make it not very suitable for vegetative growth. And some light manufacturers, and this is the one sort of changeable spectrum thing that I can understand and kind of get behind, have basically a way to dim the 660 nanometer diodes during the veg period. And that's usually what the bloom buttons did, or the bloom switches did. They turn on and off, or they dim the red diodes. So you weren't giving too much red during vegetative growth.
Right. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, I'm excited to see how these lights evolve. We talked about like the onboard interfaces. I think that's huge. Instead of having separate timers and separate controllers for people who buy one light, I think the onboards are a really cool future development that we'll probably see more and more of.
Yeah. I've been working with Metacro on theirs because they came out with the onboard timer, the first one, and it had some glitches in terms of how growers would actually want to use it. I'm like, no, if you're gonna do this, we gotta have this respond to the way, you know, growers would actually want it to be used. So I've been sort of helping them refine that. And I agree. If we can get good systems that work the way we want to use the equipment, you know, and some of these manufacturers know a lot about horticulture in general, but they don't know much about the specifics of growing cannabis plants.
Right. That's where Dr. Coco comes in. So they want you there to bridge that gap and make it intuitive and all of those things. The Order of Cultivation, our membership program here at Growcast Podcast. You can check us out at growcastpodcast.com/membership. You will find hundreds of hours of bonus content. Growcast TV, the best show in cannabis, if I do say so myself. Live weekly, broadcast every Wednesday from the Biodome, my studio/grow. Come and check it out. You also get access to our members-only Discord. You get discounts on Growcast genetics, along with products that you love, like Dino Myco and Rain Science grow bags, and more. Check it out. Discounts, community, extra content, the Ask Me Anything live streams. We'll solve all your garden problems. We got giveaways and games going on. There's a lot happening in the Order of Cultivation. Check it out right now at growcastpodcast.com/membership. It helps support the show, and you get a whole bunch of goodies along with it. I appreciate all of you members, and I hope to see you on the inside. growcastpodcast.com/membership. Try it out today. I do want to talk about this new light because there's some buzzwords around this Viper Spectra model that dropped, and you review all sorts of different brands and stuff like that, but I kept hearing the word lenses with Viper Spectra. What is this? Okay, so we went from cobs and what was the other big buzzword? Quantum boards to bar style, and now lenses? What are lenses?
Lenses. Well, lenses are lenses, right? We all use lenses in other things.
I got glasses on right now. Yeah.
Or contacts or anything. Yeah, exactly. Those are lenses. But, you know, early generation LEDs used lenses oftentimes to kind of redirect light and to, you know, create a more even distribution of light. So the lens basically covers the diode and the light has to go through that lens, and you can kind of direct the light to specific areas of the canopy during that process. However, when light passes through a lens, some of the light is converted to heat, is lost as heat. Not a lot, but some. So lenses lower the photon efficacy of a fixture. There's really no way around that. If you go back 10 years ago, lenses were pretty common across the LED grow light industry. But then LEDs started to sort of increase in efficiency. And the main marketing push for LEDs, especially in the commercial side, but also in the home grower side, and I think a lot of this leaked over to the home grower side, was all about efficacy and getting that PPE number up. And so, being twice as efficient as HPS lights or getting up to there. So the whole market became really hyper-focused on efficacy. On the one hand, grow light manufacturers had to convince commercial facilities that were running HPS that it was worth switching over and that, these were so much better than the HPS. And in order to do that, they needed the best efficacy numbers. That coupled with, utility rebates in a lot of places that were based on how efficacious your fixture was. Just like you get like rebates on your hot water heater. So the manufacturing of grow lights, over most of the last 10 years has been really hyper-focused on increasing the efficacy numbers. And, we get grow light companies trying to juice the numbers, and we always talk about, the manufacturers and are they able to come up with better LEDs and, using more of them to get, better PPE numbers and all of that. So during that push to sort of maximize efficacy, almost all manufacturers abandoned lenses because lenses would lower the efficacy. And that's really how LED bars were made, because if we're not going to redirect the light out to the edges with lenses, we're going to have to move the diodes out to the edges, right?
Spread that bitch out and make it cover.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the benefit of the lenses, is that you can move the light from a central focal point.
Right. So you can, with a relatively small fixture, you can hang it pretty low and not have a hot spot right under the fixture. You can actually, spread that light that would normally just rain down right underneath that fixture out to the corners.
So it look more like an HID floating above the canopy, which is very small as opposed to the huge surface bar style. Interesting.
And that's always been the challenge with quantum boards, right? So that's why quantum boards fell out of favor in larger size spaces, because they were always smaller form factors than the LED bars. And so if both fixtures aren't using lenses, then the only way that they're distributing the light is, just launching it into the air and letting it spread out as it travels. Right. And with a smaller fixture, you would need it to travel a longer distance to spread out more evenly. So the quantum boards would have to be hung higher above the canopy than an LED bar fixture, because it spreads the light out, it avoids the hot spot, and lets you get up close to the fixtures, right? So one of the real reasons that quantum boards are no longer used in larger spaces is because they're small relative to the space they're intended to cover. And that means you're going to have to hang them really high. And in a 4x4 tent, there's really not enough room for that. So some manufacturers have tried spreading the quantum boards out just like they did with LED bars.
Well, yeah, you end up with this big fucking UFO you have to hang in your tent. This heavy shit.
Yep. So I still think it works I still think quantum boards are the preferred for 2x2 tents, certainly. And maybe for 3x3, it's still a small enough space that you don't need to hang it so high. And basically what Vibar Spectra is doing is coming at this and saying, we're going to put lenses back on. They're probably taking a hit in their PPE numbers, but the diodes are better now than they were 10 years ago. So we're getting better efficacies. And I don't know, I try to focus more on distribution than raw efficacy. I think both are important, right? But when I'm reviewing a light, I'm drawing attention to the par map and to the distribution of light. And the efficacy number can't be awful, but it's not like the most important thing about the light. It's just, I don't think it is.
Gained in the past so many years, we've gotten so much ground on that efficiency.
Yeah.
So to lose back just a tiny percentage of it for a better par map is going to be A-okay with a bunch of people.
Yep. And they've definitely done that. I mean, it's interesting. So I took this little XS 1500 Pro from Viper Spectra. Hanging, it's not that big. It's only, I think, like 14 inches on a side or whatever, and it's covering a 24-inch space, right? So it's covering an area much bigger than its physical footprint. Hung only 12 and a half inches above the sensor, which is a really low hanging height, and getting even distribution all the way into the corners. It was sort of such a remarkable distribution when I first started testing it that I decided I really needed to do like a deeper test because, for example, in the first test, I was getting numbers like 867 in one of the squares in the middle of the test. I was getting 928 out on the edge.
Oh, wow. So even more than under the sensor.
Even more.
Those lenses were
right. I was getting 867 again in the middle of their area, and I got 876 in one of the corners.
Wow.
So it wasn't just sort of even. It was also kind of oddly distributed. Like almost every light basically has a definable hotspot or hotspots that then the light sort of distributes away from fairly linearly, right? And that wasn't the case with this light at all. So normally in a 2x2 area, my test grid is only going to be 4x4. So it's just a 16 sample grid. Right. So I'm like, this isn't enough. I need a finer grain detail about how this light is being distributed across this map. So instead of just taking one measurement right in the middle of each of my squares, I decided I was going to take 9 measurements in each square. So like 3 across the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 across the bottom. So it ended up being 144 measurements in total across the 2x2 area, right? So I'm taking a measurement every 2 inches instead of like every 6 inches. Got a really fine-grained sort of data about the light, even with the sensor, like all the way into the corner. So that the little base of the sensor is literally touching both walls in the corner, right? I'm getting above 750 all the way around in the PAR test at 12 and a half inches.
Wow.
So it's getting like all the way deep into the corners. And so then I was interested. I'm like, okay, they're aiming this light basically out of the corners. And you can see that little hot spots sort of aimed out of the corners in this fine grained test, right? With 144 samples. You can sort of see where some of the lights being pointed at by the fixture. So I decided I was going to change the hanging height, right? So I raised it up and ran another 144 sample test, which was really interesting to sort of see. And those hotspots that they had been aiming sort of towards the corners moved further into the corners than at that higher height. And in fact, the highest value that I recorded in one of those tests was in the absolute corner.
Wow. So it really does spread it out.
It really does move the light around. And in the middle, the values were like lower. So then I lowered the fixture down to 10 inches to see how sort of that would affect how the light was being kind of aimed, right? Because if you're going to do this, you got to sort of assume if you're going to be aiming the light like that, you got to have an idea of how high above the target and how big the target is and all that. And so you could definitely see interesting things in those tests. I have a lot. I really know how that light at least distributes. I've been working on this video now for like over a month because I got way too complicated with it.
Yeah, clearly, man, getting into the hundreds and hundreds of samples, but that's why we love it. That's very interesting. And I'm reminded of like the old magnifying glass trick, right? Like people who light their bowl with the magnifying glass.
Yep.
It's that lens is probably scattering it out in a similar manner. So you get these huge readings on the corners. It's fascinating. It's very fascinating. I wonder if more lenses are going to come out. Or I wonder if there's going to be all these different types and nuances to these lights, and there's not going to be any uniformity. You're going to have to hang the light as directed because it's going to be very, very different than the next guys. I don't know. I'm not sure what that's going to look like.
With this one, there's interesting pros and cons, I think. I wanted to do the fine grain test because I wanted to see if there were holes, right? I wanted to see if there were weak points that like they weren't getting adequate light to,
right.
because they were hitting, right. They were hitting sort of the corners with a lot of light. Maybe they were taking that away or robbing it from other areas. But I was kind of impressed with, there's not really holes per se, but it does strike me that hanging height is probably a little bit more important with this fixture than it would be with a lot of other fixtures, because it's really well tuned to be hung at the right height above the canopy. And, you know, it got me thinking about other things like angle attack of the light, because those corners are getting a lot of light, but they're not underneath the fixture.
I was going to ask that. You've talked about light kind of ricocheting before. Where's the diminishing return when you're shooting the light across the tent at an angle? Are we losing light there, or does it bounce right back?
It's not what we're measuring, that we're still getting the right density of it, but a lot of it's going to be coming in at a low angle. And so I don't think that that's probably as good as having it come straight down from above, having it come in at that angle. We'd have to run actual grow tests, I think, to show that. But plants would be more susceptible to, you know, being blocked out by other plants that were sort of between them and the light, or plants that were, or tops of the plants that were sort of closer to the middle of the tent. Since that light's coming in at a lower angle, they could potentially block light from getting out to the edge.
Right. Or, you know, probably not the light you want if you're not going to grow inside that enclosed reflective grow tent.
Absolutely true. And now, you know, damn me, Jordan, now I'm going to have to run another.
You're going to have to add another part.
No, I was going to do that. I was going to take the walls away and run the test without the walls to see how much of that light is just being reflected back, or how much is sort of directly aimed at specific places in the canopy, or how much of it's aimed out at the walls essentially, and then reflects back. And that's why the corners are higher. So I guess there's always more to learn about this, but I definitely agree with you. All lights, you know, in order to hit the numbers that I report in my test or whatever, you need to put them in a fully enclosed tent. If you're in an open space without reflective walls, you lose a lot of light. You lose like 40% of the light that you're creating, just overspills that space and drifts away. With a fixture like the XS 1500 Pro that's got the lenses, it might be more than 40% that drifts away.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had never thought about that before, because some people do grow in kind of an open room, and your light is going to matter. That nothing's going to compete with that bar style light, driving light straight down. And something like lenses would even exacerbate a situation like that. But let's be honest, most people are growing in tents.
Most people are growing in tents, and if you want to grow plants to full harvest in a 2x2 tent, I like this little XS 1500 Pro. I'd certainly be interested in doing a 2x2 tent grow with it to harvest. So yeah, check out my video. I'm almost done with the video. It's coming soon, and I'll kind of work my way through all of these high sample density tests that I ran. It's really interesting to then go back. I compared those tests to the original test that just did one sample per square. You know, when I was first creating the grow light testing protocol, I did a bunch of tests like that to make sure that we had adequate sampling density, to make sure that one sample per square was going to generate an accurate average PPFD. And with this fixture, it didn't. And I sort of saw that only with the higher sample density tests. So I got a lot to say. It's going to be an interesting sort of
hairs with this one, man. People love it. People love getting into the nitty gritty.
I hope so. I hope so. You don't have to encourage me very much to like go deeper. I do kind of worry sometimes. I'm like, man, are actual growers going to be interested in all this stuff? Or am I just like going off on, you know, physics tangents at this point? But
you get closer to the guy with the marbles in Jumanji. Like the deeper you go, the closer you get to insanity. But yeah, man, people are going to love it. People are going to love
Indeed.
it. Tune in, subscribe, cocoforcannabis.com, the Coco for Cannabis YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's the Dr. MJ Coco YouTube channel.
Dr. MJ Coco, apologies.
Yep.
Dr. MJ Coco. Give a follow, everybody. Before we wrap it up, I want you to plug the Spring Autoflower Challenge, but even quickly before that, let's just do a quick rapid fire, man. What are your recommendations for growing big ass autos? People are growing large autos in your challenge. Let's say I'm an auto grower and I want to grow one big. What are your top recommendations?
So yeah, we're doing the Size Matters Challenge in the Spring Autoflower Challenge this year, which is just great, right? Size Matters Challenge. And then the strain that we're working with Homegrown Cannabis Company, and they suggested some strains that we could grow. Among them was Sticky Dicky. So now we're doing the Size Matters Autoflower Challenge with Sticky Dicky, and we're all trying to grow the biggest Sticky Dickies, right?
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So trying to grow the biggest auto, first things is make sure you start in a small pot and have a transplant strategy to work that plant up. If you put small plants in big pots, they slow down because for a lot of reasons. One, they got to work on growing roots out to the bottom of this gigantic pot. Two, they're going to be sort of a little bit waterlogged. The water is going to be a little bit hypoxic and lack oxygen. And the roots aren't going to fully colonize that media anyway. So I see a lot of growers falling for this myth that autoflowers should not be transplanted, that you should put them in final containers, from seed or whatever. And that's just a guaranteed way to grow a small plant. If you put a seed into a giant container, it's going to be a small plant. You don't have second chances with autos. You can't just wait for them to become bigger plants because they're going to start flowering when they're going to start flowering. So my biggest advice, with my autos, I've already potted them up twice. So I started in fabric seedling bags. I potted them up to 1 gallon air pots. Mm-hmm. And I just potted them up a few days ago to their number 3 air pots. So 3 gallon air pots, which is where they'll finish under high frequency fertigation. You could go higher than that for, depending on how you're growing, but I definitely like working them up as you go. So transplant your autos. The other thing is, you recognize that you got about 30 days from the time the seed gets wet. And, different strains are somewhat different, but a general rule for most autos is you got about 30 days that you can train your plants before they're getting close enough to the transition that, you should let them transition and start flowering. To grow big autoflowers, I do 2 toppings. So I topped my plants the first time when they were 19 days old. I topped my plants. I topped them back to the 3rd, left 2 branches, and I topped those 2 branches on day 27, about a week later, back to the 3rd again, and I'll grow 8 mains down from that initial structure. So don't be afraid to top your plants and get a good structure going at the base. If you want to grow a big, bushy plant, you're going to have to top it. You're not going to get a big sort of bushy plant if you leave it as a Christmas tree. You're always going to be dealing with those apical dominance things. And LST, I think it's slower than topping. I think it's also more dangerous than topping. So
more dangerous? Oh, because you might split something?
Yeah, topping is not risky. It's anybody can top. Maybe they can use scissors, can top a plant. LST is an art, man. And knowing how much pressure you can put on the plant and what you're even trying to do while you're bending that plant over is much more harrowing than taking scissors and cutting the plant in half or cutting the top off. I totally
agree. It is an art. I've seen some amazing LSTers, but when I'm getting people starting growing for the first time, I teach them how to top first thing. Mm-hmm. And I know some people like the FIM and stuff like that. I'm down with all of it, but I liked what you said, which is low stress training is an art.
Yeah. And low stress training, I say that low stress training it can be high risk. Yeah. Just saying low stress does not mean it's low risk.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. I've split a few plants. I tape them back together.
Yeah.
But you know what? With autos, that's a big fucking deal. With a photo, it's tape this back together, give it some extra time.
And give it another week. Yeah, with autos, you don't get to give it another week to recover from that.
It's true.
So I agree. Keeping your plants healthy, keeping them humming along. I grow in Coco. I do high frequency fertigation from the beginning. So when they were back in those little seedling pots, I was watering them 3 times a day to get them to grow fast.
When do you start giving them nutrients and how low do you start?
You start giving them nutrients. Nutrients support photosynthesis. So, I often hear this rumor that plants are born or seeds have enough nutrients for the first 2 weeks. And that's totally false. Seeds have carbohydrates and proteins. They don't have nutrients. They have 0 nutrients. Seeds don't come with any nutrients. So plants require nutrients in order to do photosynthesis. So when those leaves open and start looking for light, your plant wants to do photosynthesis. And if you're growing in a fully neutral, now, if you're in any kind of peat-based media, there's going to be enough trace nutrients to keep that little seedling happy for a while.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right.
You don't want to scorch it though early. So you
do not want to scorch it early. So when I do start fertigating, which is when I pot, I start in little Jiffy pellets, and usually on day 4 from seed gets wet, I put that Jiffy pellet with a little seedling in it into a little pot with Coco. And, the cotyledons, and often like the first true leaves are just coming in at that point. And I start fertigating at a very low concentration, about 400 EC. So 0.4 EC, 200 ppm if you're using ppm for that.
So you're like at, what would that be compared to your like peak feed, like 15% strength? Is that right?
Oh, no. It's my peak strength isn't that high. So the highest I ever give plants is about 1500. So we're starting at 400.
I was thinking more than 10%, less than 10%. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, no, it's about a third, right? Or about almost a third. So, and in cocoa in particular, we need to get the calcium up pretty quickly or the plants will suffer. So we try to ramp that up quickly and sort of train the little seedlings to tolerate higher and higher doses. So I'll go 400, 475, 550, 625, like in successive waterings. I'm kind of rapidly ramping that up.
Get them going, especially when you're on that limited timer. So that's great advice, man, for growing a big auto. Love the overview. And a lot of, like you said, you're pushing back on a lot of myths. Like, don't be scared to top your autos. Don't be scared to pot your autos.
I think that's going to be one of the greatest things about this Spring Autoflower Challenge is we got a bunch of good growers, not just me by any stretch of the imagination, that are trying to grow the biggest autoflower. And if you want to see, because then there's going to be, growers with all sorts of different strategies that are going for this. I think it'll be really interesting to see what separates the bigger plants from the plants that didn't get as big as they could have maybe or whatever, right? Like, is there consistencies in how that group did their transplanting or did their training or did their fertilization or their, container sizes, or what is the secret sauce about the growers that end up growing the biggest autos out of this? Because we're all trying for it, right? So I think that's going to be fascinating. I invite everybody to come check out my journal. We have a whole sort of forum for this in the Coco for Cannabis Growers Forum, but for the Spring Autoflower Challenge. And my journal is my electric blue sticky dicky, because I'm growing electric blue and sticky dicky.
That'll stand right out in the forums, everybody. CocoForCannabis.com. You can just scroll through till you see electric blue sticky dicky.
My electric blue sticky dicky.
There you'll find Dr. Coco's grow journal. That's great, man. I love to hear it. Listen, I'll be back out soon. It was great hanging with you last time when we were Heads Up Poker, and you cheated me, clearly. I was like destroying Coco, like teaching him strategy. I was like, okay, here's why I bluffed you off that pot. Yada, yada, yada. And he's like, okay, fine. Let's just raise the stakes and finish this off. So let's like raise the blinds. And then you proceed to like dominate me.
I took all your pennies away from you, man. If only it had been real money, though. I will say I still have her in my cap. I'm glad you bring this up publicly. But yeah, I did take all of your loose change.
It's true. Well, you waited to raise the stakes before you got your full house and your straight flush. So
yes, I got a straight flush, dude.
You did, and I knew
I got a straight flush playing against you for pennies and nickels. Like, why can't that happen in Vegas, right?
No, see, that's the part about poker. Like, I wish that was at a real fucking table. Just wasted my luck.
Exactly. When the hell is that going to happen again, man? I totally blew it.
Let's do a vlog. We'll do some content. People want to see that. So thank you, Coco. Thank you for being a friend of the show. Thank you for hanging out when we're out in SoCal. And yeah, we love you here, man. CocoForCannabis.com, everybody. Go and support. Go and follow Dr. MJ Coco on YouTube.
Yeah. And check out my new Patreon. Come to the Ask Dr. Coco show. It's really fun to, have more kind of one-on-one conversations. So if you have questions for me, that's definitely the best place to come.
What's the URL there?
Patreon is Dr. MJ Coco.
/Dr. MJ Coco. Awesome, everybody. Go and check it out. Go and support. And we'll see you around with more Dr. Coco coming back soon.
Absolutely.
That's all for now. Any final words, Coco? We're going to wrap it on up here and sign off.
Just grower love for everybody out there.
Love it. Take care, everybody. Stay tuned. Be safe. Grow smarter. That's our show. Thank you so much to Dr. Coco, and thank you for tuning in. Now, we have some events coming up here. PESTAPALOOZA with Matthew Gates, our all-day Pest Fest. We are in New York, Long Island. That is June 3rd. And we are also in San Diego, July 29th. You can go to PESTAPALOOZA.com. That'll bring you right to the New York page. Or go to growcastpodcast.com/classes to see all of our classes and events and meetups. We got some breeder classes on the way, hash class that's in the works, some free how to grow classes. I'm working hard behind the scenes, you guys. I have really loved doing these live meetups and meeting you folks in person and learning about your grows and smoking with you. And while I'm going to slow down my schedule, I am not stopping the live events and classes. So stay tuned and come and see us. Again, code GROWCAST saves you $20 on PESTAPALOOZA. We are in New York, June 3rd. Go to PESTAPALOOZA.com, brings you right there. And we're also in San Diego, July 29th. growcastpodcast.com/classes to see all of our classes. Thank you to all of the students, all of the members, and all of you listeners. That's all for today. I hope you're doing swimmingly out there. Take care of yourself. Be well. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Do you like Growcast Podcast? Of course you do. Well, if you love this show, you're going to love A Slice of Cannabis, a show all about food and cannabis, hosted by our good friends and members, Hort and the Rugged Gent. What's up, Rugged?
Hey everyone, Rugged Gent here. If you're all about cooking, great cuisine, and cannabis like I am, then you've got to come subscribe to A Slice of Cannabis. We're free to listen to on Spotify or any podcast app, so come and subscribe today. Tune in to hear from world-renowned members of the cannabis industry as we explore the beautiful relationship between the food we enjoy and the cannabis we love to consume. Season 2 has just kicked off, so come check it out and catch up on old episodes with Jordan, friends of Growcast, professional chefs, and much more. A Slice of Cannabis. Find us on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, and I'll see you there.
A Slice of Cannabis, everyone. Go and subscribe now.